Phil, honey, I have a wonderful surprise for you, my wife Carmen announced, raising her wine glass at her parents' dinner table. Her smile sparkled under the light of the crystal chandelier in their Beverly Hills home, as the entire Martinez family turned to watch us. I sold your little boat for $75,000 while you were in Washington. The money for this meal? It came from the sale. At least one dinner is guaranteed. The words came out of her mouth as naturally as commenting on the weather, but they hit my chest like hammer blows. The little boat was my 42-foot yacht, an azimuth I had bought with 3 years of saving and hard work as a maritime compliance specialist for the Department of Homeland Security. My name is Phil Harrison, and at 35, I had just discovered that my wife of 8 years had illegally sold my federally registered property for a fraction of its actual value. But as she smiled, waiting for my applause for her financial initiative, I remained silent, my phone already vibrating in my pocket with a call that would change everything. The Martinez family erupted in celebration. Her father, Roberto, clapped slowly, the condescending applause I knew so well. Finally, Carmen made a smart decision. Boats are holes in the sea where you throw money. Her mother, Isabella, touched Carmen's arm with maternal approval. What a smart wife you are, Mija. Men and their expensive toys. It's time to be practical. Her younger brother, Diego, whistled in admiration. 75,000? Man, you could buy a decent car with that. Much better than that floating thing. But there was something they didn't know. Something that Carmen, in her characteristic arrogance, had completely overlooked when she forged my signature on the transfer documents. My yacht wasn't just personal property. It was an asset registered with the DHS National Vessel Identification System, classified as national security equipment due to my work with Coastal Patrol. Selling this vessel without federal authorization wasn't just theft. It was a federal crime. Sitting at that table, surrounded by people who had made belittling me a family sport, I felt my phone vibrate again. This time, I recognized the number. Agent Rebecca Torres, from the Maritime Crimes Division. A woman I had helped on dozens of cases over the past 5 years. "Excuse me," I muttered, getting up from the table. "I need to take this call." Carmen didn't even look up from her plate, too busy receiving praise from her family for her brilliant business decision. Roberto was explaining how smart women always know when to cut unnecessary expenses, while Isabella was planning how to spend the money from the sale. I walked out onto the Martinez's balcony, where the Los Angeles night air carried the scent of jasmine from the neighborhood's perfectly manicured gardens. Through the French windows, I could see Carmen gesturing animatedly, telling her parents every detail of how she had finally taken control of the family finances. "Agent Torres," I answered, keeping my voice low. "Phil, we have a problem. The maritime tracking system triggered a red alert 2 hours ago. Your vessel was transferred without the necessary authorizations. Are you aware of any sale?" I looked through the glass at Carmen, who was now holding an official document, probably the sales contract, displaying it like a trophy. Her handwriting had improved significantly since she had practiced my signature. "No, Agent Torres. I did not authorize any transfer." There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. "Phil, this constitutes misappropriation of federal property. We are mobilizing an investigation team right now. Stay available. And Phil, don't let the suspects know we're on our way." If you're enjoying this story of revenge and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next turned a family dinner into a lesson on the consequences of messing with federal property. While Carmen continued her celebration inside, I knew she had just confessed to a federal crime to a room full of witnesses. And in less than an hour, our married life would be the least of her problems. I returned to dinner as if nothing had happened, but my mind was now operating on a completely different frequency. Carmen continued her triumphant performance, displaying the forged documents like war trophies, while I sat silently, watching every incriminating word that came out of her mouth. "You should have seen how easy it was," she laughed, gesturing with her wine glass. 3 days practicing his signature using his old technical notebooks. The key is to understand the pressure he applies to the curves of the letters. Roberto nodded with paternal approval. "Practical intelligence, Mija. That's what separates smart wives from those who wait for permission for everything." What they didn't know was that little boat wasn't worth $75,000. It was worth $280,000. It was a 42-foot azimuth Atlantis, equipped with modified military navigation systems that I had personally installed for my work with the Department of Homeland Security. For the past 5 years, this vessel had been used in classified coastal patrol operations, testing new interception protocols and encrypted communication systems. Every electronic component on board was registered in federal databases, from the atmospheric penetration radar to the emergency transmitters that operated on frequencies reserved exclusively for government agencies. Carmen had sold military equipment for a fraction of its value to a buyer who now illegally possessed classified technology. Phil always exaggerated the importance of that boat, Carmen continued, her voice carrying the disdain I knew so well. Special navigation systems, military communications, blah blah blah. As if he were some kind of secret agent instead of just a bureaucrat who analyzes maritime regulations. Isabella laughed, touching her daughter's arm. Men and their fantasies of importance. You did the right thing, Carmen. $75,000 is a lot of money for any used boat. Diego raised his glass in a sarcastic toast. To Carmen, for finally getting her feet on the ground and making an adult decision. I remained silent, remembering how we had gotten to this point. Carmen had always shown growing hostility toward my work, especially after I began receiving assignments that required operational secrecy. To her, my inability to discuss project details was evidence that I was inflating my professional importance. The truth was that my work with DHS had become increasingly specialized. I had started as a basic regulatory compliance analyst, verifying that commercial vessels met federal safety standards. But my background in naval engineering and my knowledge of maritime electronic systems had caught the attention of supervisors in Washington. For the past 3 years, I had been assigned to a special project developing anti-smuggling protocols for the maritime border with Mexico. My personal yacht had become an unofficial testing laboratory, equipped with experimental technology that cost more than most houses. Carmen had interpreted my professional discretion as personal arrogance. Every work trip I took, every call I had to take in private, every document I brought home in sealed folders fed her narrative that I thought I was more important than I really was. Do you know what the best part was? Carmen asked rhetorically, her eyes sparkling with mischief. The buyer didn't even ask any questions. When I showed him the documents I had prepared, he simply transferred the money. $75,000 in one afternoon. My phone vibrated discreetly. Text message from Agent Torres. Team mobilized. Estimated arrival in 45 minutes. Buyer already located. Situation more serious than anticipated. The situation was developing more quickly than I had imagined. The buyer, whoever he was, now illegally possessed classified military equipment. That turned a case of domestic embezzlement into a potential national security breach. Roberto poured more wine, his voice taking on the professorial tone I knew so well. Philip, I hope you understand that Carmen made the right decision. Boats are pure depreciation. Money sitting there losing value when it could be invested in something productive. Like Diego's cryptocurrency portfolio, Isabella added, smiling at her youngest son. Or the restaurant expansion. Real investments that generate returns. Carmen nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Phil always had this fantasy of being some kind of important maritime expert, but at the end of the day, he just checks that fishing boats have their paperwork in order. The reduction of my job to paperwork checking was typical of the relationship we had developed. Carmen had constructed a diminished version of my career that justified her growing lack of respect, while I tried to maintain domestic peace by not correcting her distorted perceptions. What she didn't understand was that my little boat had participated in operations that had intercepted 3 drug smuggling attempts in the last year. The systems she ridiculed had helped seize 400 kilograms of fentanyl and arrest 17 international traffickers. Diego leaned across the table, his curiosity seemingly genuine. Seriously, Phil, why have you never properly explained to us what all that electronic equipment is for? It always seemed a bit excessive for weekend fishing trips. It was a question I couldn't fully answer, even now. The specific operational details remained classified, but the irony was painful. The family that accused me of exaggerating my importance had just committed a federal crime by underestimating that very importance. Some things are too complex to explain over family dinners, I replied diplomatically, a phrase I had used hundreds of times over the years. Carmen rolled her eyes theatrically. See? Always like that. Always too important to include us in your big government responsibilities. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a call from Agent Torres. I stood up again, noticing that everyone at the table was watching me with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "Sorry, I need to take this." Carmen sighed dramatically. "Of course you do. It must be some national emergency involving boat licenses." The table erupted in laughter, but I was already walking toward the balcony, where the night air carried the scent of Isabella's gardens. The view of Beverly Hills stretched out below, points of light marking homes where other families dined without imagining what federal crimes were being investigated miles away. "Torres," I answered. "Phil, the situation has escalated. The buyer is Viktor Kozlov, a Russian businessman with a history of export violations. He has already transferred the vessel to Long Beach, apparently preparing it for international transport." My stomach dropped. Viktor Kozlov was a well-known name in national security circles. 3 previous investigations for attempts to acquire American military technology for resale on the Russian black market. How long has he had the vessel? 6 days. Enough time to document all the systems and possibly extract data from the navigation computers. Carmen had sold my boat to a suspected industrial spy. The equipment she had derided as importance fantasies was now in the hands of someone who could use that information against the United States. As I processed the implications, I heard laughter coming from the dining room. Carmen was probably telling another anecdote about how clever she had been in getting rid of her husband's expensive toy. In less than half an hour, federal agents would be knocking on the Martinez's door, turning that celebratory dinner into something very different. And Carmen would discover that her marital fantasies of importance had come true in ways she never imagined. Through the French windows, I watched Carmen gesturing animatedly to her family, probably describing every detail of how clever she had been in circumventing my supposed stubbornness. She had no idea that she had just confessed to industrial espionage to a room full of witnesses. "Torres, I need more information on Kozlov," I muttered into the phone, keeping my voice low as Roberto raised a toast inside the house. "It's worse than we thought, Phil. Our counterintelligence team has been monitoring Kozlov for 18 months. He operates a sophisticated network for acquiring American military technology. 3 front companies, bank accounts in 7 countries, direct connections to Russian agencies." My stomach dropped. "How many people are involved in his operation?" "At least 15 that we've identified, including 2 Department of Defense employees who were arrested last week for leaking naval communication system specifications." Carmen had sold my yacht, equipped with experimental prototypes, to the center of an international espionage network. The encrypted communication systems on board contained algorithms that cost the American government tens of millions to develop. "There's more, Phil. Kozlov doesn't act alone in transactions like this. Someone provided information about the vessel before the sale. Details about equipment that would not be publicly available." "What are you saying?" "We are investigating whether your wife was approached or actively sought buyers for military technology. The timing is too suspicious to be a coincidence." The implications hit me like a punch in the stomach. Carmen hadn't simply sold my boat on impulse. Someone had specifically instructed her on how to access and transfer a classified military asset. I returned to dinner with shaky legs, trying to process the possibility that my wife of 8 years could be involved in espionage. The Martinez dining room had never seemed so surreal. Crystal baccarat reflecting golden light, carefully arranged flowers, the aroma of expensive French dessert contrasting brutally with the reality that federal agents would arrive in less than 20 minutes. "Phil dear," Isabella called to me, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness I knew so well. "Carmen was telling us how you're finally learning to be more flexible with financial matters." Diego laughed, swirling his wine glass. "Man, I admit I always thought you were a little paranoid with that boat. Security systems, expensive equipment, as if it were some kind of floating military base." Paranoid was the word the Martinez family used to describe any precaution I took. Extra locks on the doors, complex passwords, documents stored in a safe, all evidence of my excessive anxiety in their minds. Carmen nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Exactly. 3 years of trying to convince you it was just a boat, not Fort Knox. Fortunately, I found someone who properly valued the equipment." The phrase chilled me. Someone who properly valued the equipment. It wasn't natural language for Carmen to describe a casual sale. It was technical terminology, the kind of phrasing that appeared in military procurement contracts. Roberto leaned across the table, assuming his usual professorial tone. Philip, I hope this experience has taught you something about marital trust. Marriages work when spouses make collaborative decisions. Collaborative, I repeated, testing the word. Like forging signatures on federal documents. Roberto's smile faltered momentarily. Technical details, my son. What matters is the result. Isabella touched Carmen's arm affectionately. Our daughter showed real initiative. How many wives would have the courage to act so decisively? The question hung in the air like an involuntary confession. How many wives, in fact, would have access to the knowledge necessary to identify, evaluate, and sell classified military technology? The answer was simple: only those with connections or specific training. My phone vibrated with a message from Torres. We discovered the source of the initial approach. Kozlov was introduced to his wife by an intermediary at a charity event 3 months ago. A benefit for the Los Angeles Museum of Art. Carmen was listed as an organizer. 3 months. Carmen had been planning this for 3 months, not acting impulsively during my absence. She had been recruited or seduced by a sophisticated espionage operation that specifically targeted my work at DHS. Diego interrupted my thoughts, waving his fork dramatically. The best part is that now you have real capital to invest. My partner Marcus is launching a cryptocurrency startup that's going to explode. $75,000 would be the perfect investment. Carmen smiled, but there was something forced about her expression. Actually, I've already started researching more stable investment opportunities. Stable was another strange term coming from Carmen, who had always shown little interest in complex finance. During 8 years of marriage, she had left most financial decisions to me, claiming that numbers confused her. Isabella clapped her hands with maternal approval. Smart, Mija. Diversification is key to long-term financial security. Roberto nodded sagely. Exactly. Carmen has clearly thought this through methodically. Methodically was the third word in 5 minutes that didn't fit into the typical vocabulary of the Martinez family. They were using rehearsed language, phrases that sounded like financial briefings rather than casual family conversation. My phone vibrated again. Torres, arriving in 10 minutes. Keep everyone in place. Situation has escalated to national security. National security. The words echoed in my mind as I watched Carmen serve expensive French dessert, purchased with money obtained from selling American military secrets. The woman with whom I had shared 8 years of my life had become an agent of a foreign power. But one question tormented me: was Carmen a naive patriot manipulated by sophisticated criminals, or a willing collaborator who had feigned ignorance for years? The answer would determine not only her future, but mine as well. As a maritime security expert married to a possible spy, my own career was now under federal scrutiny. While the Martinez family continued to celebrate their financial victory, I mentally calculated how many years of federal prison each of them would face for knowingly receiving espionage products. The money that financed that elaborate dinner was not only stolen, it was payment for national treason. Isabella raised her glass once more. A toast to our Carmen, for showing that sometimes women know better than men when it comes to business. Everyone laughed and toasted, including Carmen, whose smile now seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression. She avoided my gaze, focusing intently on her dessert as if the strawberries required scientific attention. It was at that moment that I fully understood the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just about money or marital disrespect. It was about national loyalty, professional trust, and 8 years of shared life that now revealed themselves to be a carefully constructed lie. The sound of vehicles pulling up at the Martinez's driveway interrupted my thoughts. 3 cars with government license plates, their lights discreet but unmistakable to those who knew how to recognize them. Carmen finally looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something beyond the confident mask: real, pure, unmistakable fear. The real question was no longer whether she knew what she had done, but whether she was prepared for the consequences that were literally knocking at the door. Mrs. Harrison, keep the conversation natural, Agent Torres whispered in my ear through a discreet earpiece that one of the agents had handed me on the balcony. Let them continue to confess. The more details they provide, the stronger our case will be. I returned to the table where Carmen was distributing forged documents as if they were certificates of achievement. She had organized a complete presentation, sales contracts, bank transfer receipts, even photographs of my yacht being loaded onto a trailer. "Phil, look how professionally I've documented everything," she said, pushing a leather folder toward me. 3 competitive offers, market analysis. I even negotiated the final price. $75,000 was the best I could get. Roberto examined the papers with growing approval. "Carmen, this is quality work. You researched market comparables, assessed conditions, even arranged transportation. Much more efficient than hiring a broker." What they didn't know was that every document Carmen displayed as proof of her competence was actually additional evidence of federal crime. The photographs showed classified military equipment being illegally removed. The receipts documented unauthorized monetary transfers of government property. Isabella touched Carmen's arm affectionately. "Mija, you should consider a career in sales. You clearly have a natural talent for negotiation." Diego raised his glass again. "Seriously, Carmen. You turned Phil's expensive hobby into real capital. That's entrepreneurial thinking." Carmen blushed at the compliments, her confidence visibly growing. "Honestly, it was easier than I imagined. The buyer, Victor, was very straightforward. He didn't ask unnecessary questions about technical specifications or additional documentation." Victor. She had mentioned the buyer's name. Agent Torres had specifically asked for any information about how Carmen had come into contact with Victor Kozlov. Now she was voluntarily providing details about the sales process. "Victor seemed to understand exactly the value of the equipment on board," Carmen continued, her voice carrying satisfaction. "He mentioned having experience with similar vessels, especially the communication systems." Roberto nodded sagely. "Experienced buyers recognize quality when they see it. Much better than dealing with amateurs who don't understand technology." The irony was painful. Victor Kozlov did understand technology. He understood its military value and resale potential to hostile governments. Carmen had sold national secrets to an industrial espionage expert, believing she had found a savvy buyer. Isabella poured more wine, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "Carmen, tell us how you gained access to all the necessary documents. Phil was always so careful with his papers." Carmen laughed, the sound echoing through the dining room like an involuntary confession. 3 months of careful observation. I noticed he always used our wedding date as his password for everything. May 17, 2016. Access to the safe, digital files, even his work accounts. My stomach dropped. If Carmen had accessed my work files, she potentially had access to classified information far beyond my yacht. Documents about patrol operations, interception protocols, even specifications for other experimental equipment. "Work documents?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite my growing alarm. "Oh yes," Carmen waved dismissively. "Those incomprehensible technical reports you always brought home. Some people might find it interesting to know exactly what kind of work you really do for the government." The veiled threat was clear to everyone at the table. Carmen hadn't just sold my yacht, she had documented my classified work and was implying that she possessed information that could compromise federal operations. Diego leaned across the table, his eyes sparkling with mischievous curiosity. "Wait, Carmen has access to Phil's secret files? That's like having backstage access to the government." "They're not secret files," I replied quickly, but Carmen interrupted with a laugh. "Phil always downplays their importance, but some of those documents have interesting classifications. Confidential, restricted, some things even more serious." She paused dramatically. "Information that certain people would pay well to see." If you follow stories about justice and the consequences of thoughtless actions, subscribe to the channel because Carmen was about to discover that some information carries much higher prices than she imagined. Roberto clapped his hands slowly. "Carmen, you're revealing a talent for intelligence that we never suspected. Access to valuable information, evaluation skills, negotiation skills. Perhaps we should talk about more diversified investment opportunities." Roberto's suggestion sent alarms ringing through my mind. The Martinez family wasn't just celebrating the sale of my yacht, they were discussing expanding criminal operations using classified information Carmen had stolen. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. With access to this kind of privileged information, we could identify investment opportunities before they became public. Carmen smiled, clearly seduced by the idea of becoming the center of the family's financial operations. You know, I always thought Phil underestimated the commercial value of the information he handles. Agent Torres had requested 45 minutes to get teams fully in position. 15 minutes remained, and Carmen was confessing not only to the illegal sale of military property, but also to plans to commercialize classified national security information. My phone vibrated discreetly. Message from Torres. We obtained a federal search and seizure warrant. Kozlov was arrested attempting to load the vessel onto a Russian cargo ship. Military equipment recovered. Await signal for action. Viktor Kozlov had been arrested. My yacht and its classified systems were safe. But Carmen and the Martinez family were still celebrating what they considered the first step in a lucrative career selling American secrets. Diego raised his glass once more. A toast to Carmen, for opening our eyes to opportunities that were right in front of us. Who would have thought that the answer to our financial problems was in Phil himself? Isabella laughed musically. Sometimes the most obvious solution is the last one we consider. Carmen saw potential where we only saw expenses. Roberto assumed his usual professorial tone. This is a perfect example of applied entrepreneurial thinking. Identify underutilized assets, find appropriate markets, execute efficient transactions. Carmen was beaming with praise, completely unaware that every word of family approval would become evidence in federal court. Her transformation from frustrated wife to celebrated criminal was being documented in real time by federal agents through listening devices that recorded every confession. Best of all, Carmen added, her voice carrying genuine satisfaction, this is just the beginning. Phil has access to much more valuable information. And now that I've established contact with serious buyers. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Carmen was planning to expand operations, selling more classified information to serious buyers like Viktor Kozlov. The distant sound of approaching vehicles interrupted my thoughts. Through the windows, I saw the first discreet lights of a federal fleet silently positioning itself around the Martinez property. Carmen continued talking, completely oblivious to the fact that her career as a spy had lasted exactly 43 minutes, the time between her first confession and the arrival of federal law enforcement at the door. The first sign that something was wrong was the sudden silence of the crickets in the Martinez garden. Carmen stopped talking mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing as she processed the sound of car doors closing simultaneously on the quiet Beverly Hills street. Strange, Roberto muttered, rising from the table. We're not expecting anyone else tonight. Through the linen curtains, 5 dark silhouettes walked through the circular driveway in tactical formation. Their tailored clothing couldn't completely disguise the bulletproof vests or discreetly positioned communication equipment. Agent Rebecca Torres led the group, her posture radiating the quiet authority of someone who had executed hundreds of similar operations. Behind her, 4 agents specializing in federal crimes positioned themselves strategically, blocking all escape routes from the property. Carmen stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass, which shattered against the Italian marble floor. Phil, who are these people? Why are they coming toward us? Her voice carried a note of panic I had never heard before. During 8 years of marriage, Carmen had always maintained absolute control over social situations. Seeing her unsettled by something she couldn't manipulate or charm was almost as satisfying as I had imagined. I don't know, I lied softly, keeping my expression neutral while my heart raced with anticipation. Maybe they're neighbors checking on some emergency. Isabella rushed to the window, her hands shaking as she held the curtains. Roberto, they're wearing what looks like military gear. And there are more cars pulling up on the street. Diego tried to exit through the back door, but stopped when he saw 2 additional agents positioned in the back garden, their silhouettes clearly visible against the landscape lights. No one leaves, Roberto declared, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used to control family situations. But for the first time, his authority sounded hollow, powerless against forces beyond his influence. The doorbell rang once. Then twice. Then 3 long deliberate rings that echoed through the house like an inevitable countdown. Carmen turned to me, her eyes wild with growing understanding. Phil, does this have to do with the boat? Did you do something? Me. I raised my eyebrows with feigned innocence. Carmen, you sold my property without my authorization. If there are legal problems, I imagine they are a consequence of your actions, not mine. Agent Torres rang the doorbell again, this time accompanied by firm knocks on the oak door Roberto had imported from Spain. The sound reverberated through the house like a judge's gavel announcing a verdict. Federal Police. Open the door, please. The words transformed the elegant dining room into a crime scene. Roberto froze, Isabella began to hyperventilate, and Diego discreetly tried to delete something from his phone before realizing there was no escape. But it was Carmen who had the most revealing reaction. Instead of surprise or confusion, her face showed recognition, the kind of recognition that comes from knowing exactly why federal authorities had appeared at her door. Carmen, I called softly, watching her face pale. You seem to know these agents. Have you dealt with federal police before? She ignored me, rushing to the leather briefcase where she had organized the sale documents. Her hands trembled as she leafed through papers, searching for something specific with desperate urgency. Agent Torres knocked again, her voice carrying unquestionable authority. We have a federal search and seizure warrant. The door will be opened one way or another. Roberto finally moved, walking slowly toward the entrance like a condemned man marching to the gallows. His usual confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the genuine terror of someone who realized he was completely out of control. When the door opened, Agent Torres entered with military precision, followed by her team. She scanned the dining room quickly, cataloging every face, every document scattered on the table, every piece of evidence of an interrupted celebration. Good evening. I'm Agent Rebecca Torres, Maritime Crimes Division, Department of Homeland Security. She showed her ID to Roberto, who examined it with the expression of someone reading his own death sentence. We are investigating the unauthorized transfer of classified military property. Specifically, a 42-foot azimuth Atlantis vessel equipped with restricted navigation and communication systems. Carmen let out an audible groan. The leather briefcase slipped from her hands, scattering forged documents across the marble floor like an involuntary confession. Ms. Carmen Harrison, Agent Torres continued, her eyes fixed on my wife. You are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit espionage. The word espionage hit the room like a concussion bomb. Isabella screamed, Diego tried to run but was immediately detained by two agents, and Roberto simply collapsed into a chair, muttering something about lawyers. But Carmen remained strangely calm, as if she had finally accepted something she had been dreading for weeks. The buyer, Viktor Kozlov, was arrested 2 hours ago attempting to transport American military equipment to a Russian freighter, Agent Torres explained, her handcuffs appearing in her hands with practiced efficiency. He provided detailed information about how he was contacted and instructed regarding the acquisition. Carmen looked at me one last time, and in that look I saw not only fear, but something much worse, the realization that I had known all along. That every word she had spoken during dinner had been carefully documented. That her proud confession had become federal evidence. Phil, she whispered as Agent Torres handcuffed her. You knew, didn't you? You let this happen on purpose. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt a satisfaction I had waited 8 long years to experience. Carmen, you sold federal property to a Russian spy. The consequences of that were never my responsibility. As she was led toward the door, Agent Torres approached me. Mr. Harrison, we will need your formal statement tomorrow. And we will have some questions about how your wife gained access to classified information. I nodded respectfully. I will be fully available to cooperate with the investigation, Agent Torres. As the doors closed behind the federal agents, leaving only the stunned Martinezes in the destroyed dining room, I realized that true justice doesn't always come from elaborate revenge. Sometimes, it's simply a matter of letting people who commit federal crimes face the natural consequences of their choices. But as Roberto cried over lawyers and Isabella frantically called political contacts, one question remained. How exactly had Carmen developed connections to a Russian spy network? The answer to that question would transform everything I thought I knew about my 8-year marriage into something much darker and more complex than simple marital betrayal. 6 months later, I sat on the wooden bench in federal court as Judge Patricia Thornton read the final sentence. Carmen stood before the defense table, wearing the orange prison uniform that had become her standard attire since her arrest. Ms. Carmen Harrison, the judge's voice echoed through the silent room, for the unauthorized sale of classified military property to foreign agents, conspiracy to commit espionage, and multiple counts of wire fraud. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a sound that reverberated through my soul like the final closing of a chapter that had lasted 8 years. Carmen did not cry. She did not protest. She just nodded with the resignation of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of her choices. The federal investigation had revealed something far more sinister than a vengeful wife selling her husband's property. Carmen had been recruited by Viktor Kozlov's network 18 months earlier, during a charity event where she had met international investors interested in exclusive American opportunities. What had started as casual conversations about my work at DHS had evolved into a systematic transfer of classified information. Carmen received $5,000 a month to photograph documents I brought home, report my travel schedules, and identify vulnerabilities in maritime security protocols. Roberto Martinez got 8 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Bank investigations revealed that he had helped funnel Russian payments through his import companies, disguising espionage payments as legitimate commercial transactions. Isabella received 5 years for obstruction of justice after deleted messages were discovered in which she advised Carmen on how to destroy evidence. Diego, surprisingly, cooperated fully with federal investigators and received only probation plus community service. The most dramatic transformation, however, took place within me. During the first few months after the arrests, I struggled with conflicting feelings about my role in the events. Part of me wondered if I could have intervened sooner, if I should have confronted Carmen about her suspicious activities instead of allowing federal authorities to build their case. Agent Rebecca Torres helped me process these issues during multiple debriefing sessions. "Phil," she told me during our last meeting, "you didn't cause this situation. You simply had enough training to recognize the warning signs and enough wisdom to let professionals handle it appropriately." The Department of Homeland Security offered me a promotion to Senior Maritime Security Specialist, with increased security clearance and responsibility for West Coast operations. My job now involves training other specialists on how to identify potential security breaches in domestic settings. Ironically, my personal experience with marital espionage has made me an expert at recognizing similar patterns. I developed protocols that helped identify 6 other cases where family members of cleared contractors were being targeted by foreign intelligence services. I sold our house in Beverly Hills and moved to a coastal property in Monterey, where I can see the Pacific Ocean from my kitchen window. It is a daily reminder that oceans connect countries, but also serve as barriers protecting those willing to defend what matters. My new yacht, a replacement Azimuth I bought with insurance money, is equipped with even more sophisticated security systems. But this time, only I have access to the codes. And the only people who step aboard are fellow federal agents who share my commitment to protecting American interests. I met Carmen one last time, 3 months before her transfer to a federal penitentiary in Oregon. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished not only by her prison clothes but by something deeper, the loss of the artificial confidence that had sustained her through years of deception. "Phil," she said through the bulletproof glass, "you knew all along, didn't you? You let me continue until federal authorities had enough evidence." I kept my expression neutral. "Carmen, you made choices. I simply reported suspicious activity to the appropriate authorities. The consequences were the result of your own actions." She nodded slowly, finally understanding that my apparent passivity during those final months had not been weakness or ignorance, but careful documentation of her crimes. "You could have stopped me," she whispered. "You could have warned me." "I could have," I agreed. "But then you would have simply found more careful ways to continue betraying your country. And how many more American secrets would you have sold before your eventual capture?" It was our last conversation. Not out of anger or revenge, but because there was nothing left to discuss. 8 years of marriage had turned out to be an elaborate deception, and any nostalgia I might have felt was overshadowed by my responsibility to national security. The irony was not lost on me. The woman who had spent years criticizing my work as paranoid and overblown had proven exactly why such vigilance is necessary. Her casual disregard for security protocols had made her a perfect target for foreign exploitation. 2 years after it all ended, I receive occasional updates on Carmen's progress in federal prison. She is enrolled in educational programs, apparently learning accounting, a skill that may help her find legitimate work when she is eventually released. Roberto died of a heart attack 6 months into his sentence. Isabella was released early for good behavior, but she lost everything: her home, her business, her social standing. She now works as a supermarket cashier, a dramatic fall from Beverly Hills socialite to minimum wage worker. Diego, surprisingly, prospered after cooperating with authorities. He started a legitimate technology consulting business and occasionally sends Christmas cards expressing gratitude for having been forced by the federal process to re-evaluate his life choices. But the most important lesson from this whole experience was not about legal justice or federal consequences. It was about recognizing that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those closest to us, disguised as everyday marital friction. Carmen's contempt for my work, her constant criticism of security measures, her casual curiosity about classified projects, all warning signs that I should have addressed directly rather than hoping that marriage counseling could resolve underlying issues. Professional security training teaches that insider threats are often family members or close associates who gain access through relationships of trust. Living through this experience personally gave me insights that could not have been gained through textbooks or case studies. Now, when I train other cleared contractors on recognizing potential security breaches, I share appropriate elements of this story. Not to shame Carmen nor myself, but to illustrate that espionage operations target emotional vulnerabilities, not just financial ones. The main message I always emphasize is that protecting national security requires more than following protocols at work. It requires vigilance in personal relationships, awareness of warning signs in family dynamics, and a willingness to report suspicious behavior even when it involves people we love. Carmen tried to destroy me by betraying everything I worked to protect. Instead, she inadvertently provided me with perspective and experience that made me better at my job and more effective at protecting American interests. Last time I checked, Viktor Kozlov was serving 25 years in a maximum security federal prison. His spy ring was completely dismantled, potentially saving millions in stolen technology and preventing who knows how many American operational secrets from reaching hostile governments. If stories like this, about how justice eventually finds those who betray trust, resonate with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Because in the end, the truth always comes out, even when those closest to us try to bury it under layers of deception and manipulation. Today, standing on my deck in Monterey, watching waves crash against rocks that have stood firm for millennia, I understand that some foundations are strong enough to withstand any storm. Carmen thought she could undermine everything I had built, professionally and personally. Instead, she only revealed which foundation was truly unshakable: not my marriage, not my social connections, but my commitment to protecting something greater than myself. In the end, that proved to be a foundation that could withstand any attack.